Welcome back to Real Time with Bishop McGovern. I am your editor and producer, Brianna Whalen. Along with me is your main host, Bishop McGovern. How are you today, Bishop?
I'm doing very well, Brianna. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. So we just finished talking about your trip to Rome for bishop school. And I have learned that on September 4th that Pope Francis is going to beatify Pope Paul I.
Correct. So in our previous show, we had talked about me going to Rome for this seminar for bishops. But while I am there on the 4th of September, Pope Francis is scheduled to beatify one of his predecessors, Pope John Paul I. Albino Luciani is his baptismal name. Albino Luciani was elected Pope in 1978 after the death of Pope Paul VI. And now Pope Francis has announced that he's going to beatify John Paul I. So I hope, because this will happen while I'm in Rome on that Sunday at St. Peter's Square, I hope to be able to go to the Mass, and possibly I might be able to concelebrate as a bishop with the other bishops and the Holy Father at that liturgy.
What does it mean for Pope Francis to beatify somebody?
Well, in the Church, we believe that the goal of our lives is to become saints, and that the Church raises up before us certain men and women, some adults, some children, who have lived a life of exemplary holiness in some aspects, in some way, and that the Church believes that that person is with God. That's canonization, where we say the Church believes that this person is with God in heaven. Beatification is the step before canonization, where a person who's lived life that their goodness is known, there's been an investigation of their life, there's been witnesses and testimony, and one miracle, at least, as a sign that this person's intercession has been heard, that this person's prayer in heaven has influenced the Lord, that the Lord has granted something through that person's intercession, and so that person may be beatified, meaning that the Church lifts them up before us as an example, and that we can grow in devotion, venerating a person like a Mother Teresa or like an Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, as someone who's a model of holiness.
Do you know if this is Pope Francis' first beatification?
Well, normally the Pope, for centuries, they had a cardinal would do the beatification ceremonies, and the Pope would always be the one to canonize saints. And so normally in the modern times, the Pope would canonize people, declare them saints, but in this case, he's also going to he's going to do the step before that, declaring John Paul I blessed. So popes often don't beatify people who have been declared venerable, but in this case, he is. Pope Francis has actually, interestingly, encouraged more ceremonies for beatification to happen in the local church with the local bishops gathered, and then he usually sends the cardinal, who's the head of the dicastery for saints, to go and preside and lead the rite of beatification. So, long answer to your question, but under Paul VI and John Paul II, sometimes the Pope would beatify people as well as canonize them, but Pope Francis has given beatification ceremonies more to cardinals to do on the local level with the local church where that holy person came from.
Didn't know that. Bishop, who is John Paul I?
Well, Albino Luciani, I tell you, in 1978, I think that's when the world came to know him. He was originally from Italy, from Forno di Canale, which is in the Diocese of Belluno e Feltre. He became a priest in a very young age of 22 in 1935. He worked in the diocese there in teaching and parish work. He eventually became the Bishop of Vittorio Veneto in Italy at a young age, 46. Eventually became the Patriarch of Venice, or we would think of an Archbishop of Venice, but they get a special title in Venice as Patriarch. And then after the death of Paul VI, Luciani was elected by the College of Cardinals and became Pope. So he wrote a beautiful book of letters about famous people. He also wrote some poetry. Some of his books have been published since his death in 1978, and we'll talk about that. But he is a man of remarkable presence, prayerfulness, and as happens with this beatification, really were recognizing the holiness of his life and the goodness of his life.
What was so unique about his election after Pope John VI?
Paul VI. So what was unique was that he took it was expected, at that time, popes were normally Italian for hundreds of years. It was John Paul II who broke that streak with being the first non-Italian pope in about 400 years to be elected. But so Luciani was an Italian. What was unusual, though, was he took a double name. Normally when a pope is elected, he takes a name other than his baptismal name. Giovanni Montini became Paul VI. Karol Wojtyła became John Paul II. Joseph Ratzinger became Benedict XVI. The Pope is asked when he's newly elected, by what name shall you be called? What was unusual was up until 1978, the Pope was usually Pius or Clement would be a name, or Urban. But it was very unusual to take a double name. And what Luciani explained he tried to do by taking the name John Paul was he wanted to honor both John the 23rd and Paul VI, who were his two immediate predecessors. So that sense of, I think he wanted to indicate a kind of continuity with the popes who had led the Second Vatican Council, who had really, in the 22 years before the election of John Paul I, had really steered the church and shepherded the church as we're going into the modern age. And so in some ways, I think taking that double name was one of the most unique things that Luciani did with his election. And then we see John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła chose a double name and became John Paul II. And so I'd be curious to see in history if anyone else takes a double name, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now.
What else is so unique about John Paul I?
Well, the fact that he had a very short papacy. He only was Pope for 33 days, which is one of the shortest times anyone has served as Pope. Paul VI was up in years and sickly in his final days. So no one was surprised, I think, when Pope Paul VI died. But then Luciani was, I think, about in his 60s when he was elected, and in 1978. And I can remember, how, you read the newspaper, like in there's a box at the corner that has papers you can buy for a quarter, and you open the door and you take a paper out. Well, I remember we'd gone through, Paul VI died August 6th, and I remember the newspapers in that box at the street corner, saying, the Pope is dead. Well, then we come out in September. I remember my brothers, we were walking up to the newspaper stand. We were going up to the corner to catch the bus to go to school, and it was September 29th. It was, I think, the day after John Paul I died on the 28th of September, and we went to the corner the next morning. We see the headline in the honor box, in the newspaper box, "The Pope is dead," and we thought, why is that old newspaper there? That happened, weeks ago. And then we took a closer look and we realized, no, this Pope, the new Pope, has died. And so that was a real shock to people that he was only with us for 33 days as Pope. So that was also remarkable. And then they went through all the rituals for his funeral, and then the days leading up then to another election in the Sistine Chapel. And the next time then the College of Cardinals chose Karol Wojtyła, who took the name John Paul II, and was with us as our Holy Father for decades as John Paul II, who is also now declared a saint.
Wow. So what made him be declared a saint?
Well, I think he certainly, the holiness of his life, there's been many people interviewed who knew him personally. His charity, his joy were all hallmarks of his life, his prayerfulness, and his simplicity. I mean, all the qualities that were recognized in him, that was why the College of Cardinals elected him Pope. But there was even more, I think, that people came to appreciate about him. And in many ways, he was a bit like a shooting star, that he kind of went across the sky of 33 days as Pope and then went to the Lord. But I think, it's not just his time as Pope that's being recognized here, but all that led up to it. And I think that's one of the things we realize is all of us are called to sanctity. All of us are called to holiness. And that we hope that it's, across our lives, we continue to listen to the Lord and turn to the Lord and serve the Lord, that we can become holy people. So John Paul I is being beatified, I think in recognition not just of the trust that we have that he's with God. It's not just about his time as Pope, as important as that is, but also his whole life and how he was really a servant of the Lord through and through.
What does it mean to be in our holiness?
To grow in holiness?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a sense of being able to live with a kind of a communion of love of God, to be a person of prayer who talks to God, listens to God, and that relationship with God impacts your life. That you try and imitate the selflessness of Jesus, that he poured himself out in his life, death, and resurrection, that he gives himself to us to strengthen us, that we receive many things from God, but we give ourselves away in the way that we live our lives, always with a sense of being called by God to a sacrificial love in imitation of Jesus. And I think in some ways, the more that we reduce our ego, the more that we reduce our selfishness, that we allow the light of God to shine through our lives a little bit more and a little bit more, so that it's really, we're allowing God's light to shine through us.
Do you have any final things to say about Pope John I?
Pope John Paul I.
Paul I, sorry.
John Paul. So I would say that he holds a special place in my heart because I can, at the age of 14, I vividly remember the events around his election and his death. And I would say that sometimes his life and his short papacy remind us that the ways of God are mysterious, that why the Lord led the College of Cardinals to elect him, and then in a very short amount of time the Lord called him home. We'll never know that this side of heaven, but I think it does help us to ponder the mystery of we are the Lord's. In life and death, as St. Paul says, in life and death, we are the Lord's. And I think his life, his death, and now his beatification remind us that we are the Lord's.
Well, we hope you enjoyed Bishop School coming at the end of August, and we are thankful that you told us the story about Pope John Paul I.
Well, thank you, Brianna, and thanks to all of our listeners. And please watch the Catholic media, especially as we get closer to September 4th. That's the day, that's the Sunday that the beatification will take place by Pope Francis in Rome. Thank you all for listening, and have a blessed day.
Until next time, I am your editor and producer, Brianna Whalen, again with our main host, Bishop McGovern. We'll see you all. Bye.